I am Mr. Brooks, the Director of Communications, and we'll get started in just a few moments. I wanted to just talk a little bit about myself. I've been with Enlighting for about 10 years now. I joined a long time ago, back when there was maybe five or 600 students. I live in North Carolina, and as we're going to talk about, I was in the military. I'm going to talk about some of the things to consider before joining the military. We also have with us Miss McCune. Do you want to say hello?
Hi, I'm Miss McCune. I'm one of the high school counselors. If your last name's H through K, and I think I have W's. So we're glad everybody's here today. Thank you for joining us.
Perfect. And then we also have with us Miss Smith. She's going to be running the tech side. And Miss Vogler, I think she's here just to weigh in if anyone has any questions or concerns. So with that, let's go and get started. We're going to talk about 10 things to consider before joining the military. By show of hands, is anyone either already signed up to join the military or thinking about it, or are you just kind of seeing what's out there? All right, so Jesse, looks like you're pretty interested. Jay, Marcus, perfect. All right, it looks like we still got people joining. That's great. So before we get started, take a moment and grab a pen and a paper. I strongly recommend you do this. You can take notes on the computer if you wanted to, but something about pen and paper, it kind of sticks with you a little bit longer, and you can share that with friends and family. So go ahead and take a moment and grab a pen and paper. If you have any questions, write those down as well. You can put them in the chat. You can write them down, and then we'll discuss them at the very end. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. This is a picture of me back when I was on one of my deployments. You're probably thinking to yourself, Mr. Brooks, you've aged really well. Thank you. I appreciate the compliment. That was very nice of you. I joined right after high school. So I was 18 years old. I finished high school. I spent the summer just kind of getting all my affairs in order. And then in August, I joined. I started as an E1. That's going to be an enlisted first class. And I concluded after 4 years as an E5. That's not too typical. Usually, when someone joins as an E1, they leave after 4 years as an E3 or an E4. The reason I was able to go to E5 is because my field was very, very small, the job that I had, and there were not a lot of people in it. So I kind of moved, pretty quickly through it. I worked in cryptology. I was a CTR. I had 1 year in A school and C school. So go ahead and write this down. A school is going to be mandatory. That's where you're learning the basics of your job. C school, there might be a couple different options for you. What your job is might not have a C school, but if you do, it's going to be kind of a continued training within that field, maybe based on whatever location you're going to, or if you're in the Navy, whatever kind of ship you're going to. So that's something that will be figured out for you. Typically, 1 year for A school and C school is a lot. Usually, it's going to be something like a couple months, maybe half a year. It just kind of depends on your job. So for me, I had 1 year in A school and C school. I would not anticipate that. I planned for something much less. For me, I spent 4 years active duty, 1 year A school and C school, and then 3 years on a ship. During that time, I did 2 deployments to Africa, Europe, Middle East, and Far East. I went to a lot of very diverse places. It was great. And all the information on this slide is 18 years old. I joined 18 years ago, a long time ago. Chances are most things that we're going to discuss are still the same. I'm going to talk about a lot of general policies and practices and benefits, but some of the differences that do come might be just because it's been 2 decades. So let's talk a little bit about the first thing to consider, which is exploring jobs. Write this one down. Google, ChatGPT, however you want, to try to find a job that's going to work well for you. Often you might think, okay, well, I'm joining the Air Force, and so let's see what jobs are in the Air Force. So you might kind of have set in your mind, I'm going to be in the Navy. Let's see what jobs are in the Navy. I encourage you to go the other way. Start looking up different jobs in the military and try to find something that really stands out to you. And then from there, you can see what different branches have it. So the obvious thing is going to be combat and warfare roles, infantry, things that you usually think of with the military. But that's far from the only job. Think of if you're on like a ship like I was, if every single person, you know, dealt with shooting, then you would have a couple hundred people that only know how to shoot and not have any other jobs. That would not function very well. It was basically like a small city. So you had people that dealt with just all these different kinds of roles and responsibilities. That way we could cohesively work together. So besides combat roles, you have engineering, technical jobs, medical and healthcare, aviation and piloting. This was kind of my area: information technology and cybersecurity, logistics and support, communications and media, administration, human resources, law enforcement, security, science and research. So you can see that there's a ton of different jobs within the military. So if you lean kind of towards science and research, kind of Google what jobs exist in the military with that, and you're probably going to find a lot of really cool things that you didn't even know about. So my second advice is going to then be to explore the branches. We have obviously the Army, but we have Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and the Space Force. The Army tends to be kind of ground based. The Navy tends to be sea based, actually out in the middle of the ocean. Air Force tends to work in air operations. Marine Corps tends to be land and sea, and they tend to be, much quicker. Coast Guard tends to be on the coast, kind of maritime law, things like that. And then the Space Force is new, and that's dealing with space operations. I would say find the one that's going to be the most interest to you. So I was most interested in the sea. And so I found a job, I found my branch, and it worked out pretty well. I got to spend a lot of time on the ocean, outside, looking at the ocean, just beautiful views, looking up at night, middle of the ocean, you see tons of stars. I've never seen more stars than when I was in the Navy. I find that really relaxing. So that worked out really well for me. So the second thing you're going to want to do is do quite a bit of search online for what are the different branches, what are the different places that they operate, and try to find something that works really well for you. The third thing, and you all have your pen and paper, make sure to write this down. Get everything in writing before you actually sign a contract. And we'll kind of explore that a little bit more. So, how to talk to recruiters. The recruiters, in my experience, they're great. They were very knowledgeable. They were helping you figure out like what would be a good job, different things like that. But keep in mind that their job is to help get you in the door. They have a quota. They might be told we need to bring in 20 new recruits this month just so that we can, as an entire Army or Navy, be able to keep up with our numbers. So bear in mind that they're there to support you, but you also need to make sure that you are protecting yourself. So when you talk to them, I've heard horror stories of, well, my recruiter told me this, and that was never the case. Yeah, maybe that happened, maybe it didn't happen. So I'd say just be really smart when you talk to the recruiter and don't see them as adversarial. Just see them as someone who is very knowledgeable, can help you get going, but you definitely need to do your own research. They're going to have you take what's called an ASVAB. Technically, I took two ASVABs. The first one was kind of like a test one, so I could see like what kind of jobs I could get access to, and then the real one happened later on. So the ASVAB is going to be a test kind of like the ACT and SAT, not really. And with that test, the military is going to say, okay, generally speaking, this is maybe how intelligent you are in science or in math or in all these different areas. What they don't want to do is put somebody into the nuclear field who, as it turns out, is not very nuclear minded or scientifically minded. So that's going to be a way for them just to kind of see what are your different strengths and interests and things like that. So the first ASVAB test I took, I scored like 99, whatever was like really close to the top. And they said, oh, you can have any job you want in the military. So I use that as a way to start a conversation. And they said, you know, actually, I think I told them, what are the hardest jobs to get? And they said, cryptology and nuclear. And I said, tell me more about each of them. They said, cryptology is kind of math, nuclear is kind of science. I'm not scientifically minded, so I kind of lean towards math, and I ultimately did that. Then I took the real ASVAB, like once I was actually signed up and everything, and I scored a little bit lower, and I was still able to get into the job that I wanted. But my takeaway from that was the initial ASVAB is probably a lot easier, so you kind of walk in maybe a little starry-eyed. So just know going into it that the first ASVAB that you can take It's to help you kind of get a general picture. The real ASVAB is going to come later and it's going to be a little bit harder. And then write this down, please. Get everything in writing, have it be really specific, and keep a copy. And I have a good example of what this is going to look like in a little bit. But remember, I said, like, people joined and then they're like, oh, my recruiter said I would have this or this or this. And there's usually things like, yeah, you want Japan? You can totally get orders to Japan. I'll make sure you get orders to Japan. And then the person signs up and they never see that recruiter again and they don't go to Japan because that's not really how the timeline for everything works. So whatever guarantees you get from the recruiter, that's great. Just make sure it's in writing, really specific, and keep a copy for that for yourself. So go ahead and write that down. That's going to be something that either never comes up for you during your active service, or you're really going to wish that you had done that. All right. So you're in, you signed the paperwork, you've gone to boot camp, all that stuff. Let's talk about, this is probably my favorite section, all the benefits and opportunities. It is mind-boggling how this joining the military can just open your life to so many different things. Let's just go down the line. Educational benefits are huge. For me, the post 9/11 GI Bill, my timeline was high school, military, undergraduate, master's. The post 9/11 bill covered all my tuition for my undergraduate and most of my tuition for my master's. It paid for my rent for whenever I was in school. It gave me extra money for books and stuff like that. It's because of the post 9/11 bill that I graduated with a bachelor's with no student debt. And when I got my master's, incredibly little student debt. That's huge. You hear all the time about people that have six figures of student debt, and now their life is kind of tied to that, and they can't make a lot of life decisions until that's paid off. This is nothing to scoff at. This was huge for me. This was a just a massive deal. They also have something called a tuition assistance program. Depending on your job in the military, if you're deployed, where you're deployed to, your schedule, you might be able to take college classes while on active duty. TAP, Tuition Assistance Program, would be the way for you to do that. It's not for everyone, but you might as well look into it. Maybe take a few classes over the course of half a year just to kind of build up some of those credits. And then finally, the scholarship and loan repayment. This is for people who were in college, finished college or quit or however that ended up, and had just a lot of debt. And then the military can help them pay off that debt. Sometimes they pay off the entire thing. They might, just do some of it. Going back a little bit to get everything in writing. I had a buddy when I was in A school, and that was his life. He got his bachelor's, and he had, I don't even know how much money in debt. He owed a ton of money. So he said, well, I'm going to join the military. I've always kind of wanted to do that. And I'm going to make sure I get in writing that they will pay off my entire, college tuition. I want to say that he went to like Army, and the Army said, oh, we'll do some. And he said, well, I'm not going with you then. Then he went to the Navy, and it's like, hey, the Army said that they would only pay some. I wanted all of it paid off. And the Navy said, yeah, we can do that. We'll pay off all of it. I'm sure it's a lot more complex than this. And he said, great, give that to me in writing. They gave it to him in writing. He joined, and I think he had to finish up his 4 years, and then the entire thing was paid off. So that's what I mean when I say make sure you're specific and get it in writing. If he didn't, then there's a chance that he would not have gotten all of his college paid for. So here are some of the benefits and opportunities concerning education. This is huge. I don't have it on here, but if you go through the military, even if you stay in the military and you don't use up your post 9/11 bill, you can gift it to, I think, like your spouse or your child. So you can have a lot of their college paid for as well. Again, that's a huge deal. Healthcare. Healthcare is expensive, as I'm sure your parents will tell you. In the military, they have a healthcare system just for active military veterans, active military dependents, spouse, and children's. And this is a big deal. I had a minor surgery. I didn't have to pay anything because it was covered under this. I have friends that would have children, and I had one friend who had something like 5 kids over 8 years, and he and his wife decided we're just going to have all our kids now while I'm in the service, and that way we don't have to pay for anything because they just did it all through the TRICARE. That worked out great for them. And then medical and dental care, you can get that either for free or heavily subsidized. That's a huge ticket item that can be covered potentially. And other benefits, traveling the world. Like I said, I went to 4 continents. I saw parts of the world that I never would have thought I would. I went really north where it was freezing. I went, down to Africa where it was nice and hot. Everywhere in between. I think my favorite place was the Seychelles Islands. Google it sometime. Just beautiful islands. Um, I remember just being outside and there were like giant bats just flying around in the middle of the day, and you could just see them. I went to Scotland, Ireland, Italy, Sicily, just all over the place. Amazing, amazing locations, great stories. And then another benefit is the camaraderie and support. I've got friends. I've been out for 14 years now, something like that, and I have friends that I still text from the military. It's great. The amount of just connections that you get from being in a really unique life circumstance. These are friendships that you'll never forget. And then I'm just going to go through a bunch of these other benefits because I can talk for hours. So I won't talk about all these ones. Personal growth and discipline. I personally was a very different man when I left than when I entered. It kind of helped me kind of figure out some stuff in my life, get a track, um, just grow a lot of different personality traits that have really helped me in the last 15 years. Physical fitness, that's kind of a given. You got to be physically fit. Leadership experience. There's retirement and pension plans, housing and living allowance, career development, job training, life insurance, survivor benefits, VA home loans, disability compensation, discounted or free travel, VA support. All of these things that I've listed here in the last couple slides, they're not all just generically good, no strings attached. Anyone has access to them. They all have their kind of nuances or things to kind of keep in mind, or times where it will or won't work. But generally speaking, 9 times out of 10, if you put in the effort, you'll have an amazing time and you'll be able to benefit from a lot of these different things. So we talked about the positives. Now let's talk about not negatives, but just understanding what it is that you're getting into. It is a commitment. You get a lot out of it, but you have to put a lot into it. So the first thing I want to talk about is the time commitment. It's 8 years. These numbers I'm going to say are back from when I was in. They're probably the same. They might be a little bit different. If you talk to a recruiter, you'll be able to get a more specific kind of idea. But that's 8 years. For me, the first four were active duty. So I was working, basically 24/7, 365 for 4 years. I have days off and things like that. But especially on deployments, you're working that entire time. You can't have another job. The commitment is a solid 4 years where you are responsible to your job. From there, you have a couple options. You can re-up, and we'll talk about that in a moment, or you could be technically under contract for another 4 years, but in the reserves. This is what I did. So I did 4 active, where I was working all the time, deployed a bunch, all that, and then I did 4 years in the reserves. There's two type of reserves. There's the one that you hear about on TV and stuff, like 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year, that kind of thing. For that reserves, you get paid some money. You get some of the benefits. You have to keep your hair in regulation. You have to stay relatively fit. You have to be able to travel to different locations. I had a friend, Ivan, who did this, and he kind of had mixed feelings on it. He was glad he did it because it just it was a good transition for him from full military to civilian life, where he still had access to a lot of those benefits and different things like that. But he was also in college, so he kind of struggled with like, okay, well, I've got a test coming up, but I also have to go and report for duty, and so it became kind of like a bittersweet thing. I ended up just doing what's called, I think it's the IRR, which is like a secondary reserves. For that one, I didn't have to keep my hair short. I could have gained weight if I wanted to. I probably did. And what you don't have to do is show up all the time for that 1 weekend, 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year kind of thing. But you also don't get any benefits. You don't get the money for being in the military or different things like that. You're basically on the secondary reserves. So if we entered into a massive conflict and a lot of the initial reserves were called into action, they would then call on those secondary reserves. That's what I did. That worked out really well for me because I just want to focus on school and different things like that. But there's going to be benefits to both, so try to find the one that works for you. 6 and 2. Some jobs don't have 4 active and 4 reserve. Some have 6 active and 2 reserve. This was one that if I had gone for my dream job, I would have had. It would have been linguistics and cryptology. That would have had a lot more training required. And so it would have forced me into a 6 year active contract and then 2 reserve. And I didn't want that. I was pretty set with this trajectory for my life. But there are some jobs that are like this. So if you see yourself as potentially career, like 20 years in the military, and you have this option, that would open up some doors for you. Just something to keep in mind. And then at the end of every 4 years, or in this case, 6 and 2, you can re-up. So I did 4 active. At the end of that 4 active, I had the option to go reserves or to re-up and do another 4 years active. Sometimes, depending on the job, depending on if a Republican or Democrats running the country, it tends to mean that there might be bonuses for re-upping. So let's say you're in a job that's really, really, really narrow to get in. It's hard to get into that job. There's a chance that you would get something like $5,000 or $10,000 bonus for re-enlisting for 4 years. Don't hold me to that because there's a lot of variables that will kind of push one way or the other. But if you're looking for a 20-year job in the military, that's not something to ignore. You could look and see like, okay, what jobs tend to have like really high reenlistment bonuses, and then maybe kind of nudge in that direction to see if that's a benefit. That's a car, that's a massive house payment. There's some benefits there. All right, we talked a little bit about the reserves. Let's talk about the commitments with the demands. Deployments. I did 2 deployments. Those are hard. Both of my deployments were about a year. So that was a year that I was away from, my wife. I was away from the U.S. Working, like I said, really long days, basically 7 days a week. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's not easy, but it shouldn't be easy. This is a high risk, high reward kind of career. And so that's just something to keep in mind is that there's a good chance you're going to go on deployments. That's life. Duty days. So a good example of a duty day, if you don't know what that is I was on a ship. We're deployed, like I said, for like a year, and then we come back for maybe like 2 weeks, and then we go out for a month and come back for a week. The time that we're back in port, it's not like everyone just leaves the ship and goes home and there's an empty ship and it's vulnerable to fire or anything like that. No. What they would do on my ship is they broke us into 6 sections. So you would be randomly assigned to one of those 6 sections. And then one every 6 days, I had to stay on the ship for the entire 24-hour period. That way, if there was a fire, if there's an attack, if there's anything, there's people on the ship that can still deal with it. So that means that, I was married when I was in the military, and between deployments and underways and duty days, I didn't get to see my wife a whole lot because I had this responsibility. And another demand, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, is that you're going to get shaped by the military. It's going to help you become the person, the man or woman that you're going to be in the future. You'll learn a lot more responsibility. You'll be hardened in some ways and just kind of made to be a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? Capable of getting out there into the world and being able to do the things that you need to do. And let's talk about one more thing. This all sounds like negative stuff. It's, like you join the military, there are benefits, there are downsides. These are some of the downsides. I want to talk about repercussions when it comes to not fulfilling your duties in the military. They take it very, very, very seriously. So when I finished my A school and C school, I got new orders to go to a ship. What you don't do is just up and leave because there's all these different departments where you're stationed that need to be aware that you're leaving. So you have like a signature list. You got to get like a dozen signatures from like the head cook so he doesn't make too much food, from the person that runs the barracks so they know that there's going to be a bed available soon, that kind of thing. and it takes days. And it's kind of frustrating because you have to do it when other people are available. You're basically just running around for a couple days just trying to get signatures, and you're ready to go on to your next station. It's kind of frustrating. I have a friend. His name is Luke, and I finished A school and C school before him, and then I just never really saw him again until a couple years later. I got back from one of my deployments, and I'm walking down the pier, and there's Luke. I'm like, "Hey man!" And we're talking, we're chatting, and stuff like that. And he's like, "Let's walk and talk," because I'm working, and he had like a big bag of garbage. And I was like, "Oh yeah, let's." We're walking, we're talking, and I was like, so how's it been? Like, how's the job? Like, because we had the same job. And he was really embarrassed. And he basically, he told me what he did, which is when he was getting done with A school and C school, he was also very frustrated by the fact that he had to get all these signatures and how long it was taking. So he forged a bunch of signatures and just hoping that it would be a lot quicker. And he got found out, as well he should have, and he still had to do his full 4-year contract. But instead of doing cryptology, which was the job that we signed up for, his job was that he was going to go. He was stationed to a just a pier, basically, and when ships had garbage, food waste, everything, it was his job for 4 years to go to the ships, get the garbage, go and throw it in the dumpster, by foot. He didn't have like a cart or anything, and he just had to throw away the garbage, and that was his career. So the repercussions are you're being entrusted with stuff. You need to take it very seriously, and you shouldn't skirt those responsibilities. I felt bad for him, but at the same time, I was like, sorry, man. Like it's kind of what you get is, he had a hard time, and he faltered. He made a bad choice, and he had to stay within his contract and just didn't have as good of a job. So understand the commitments. There's time, a lot of stress, and a lot of responsibility. But again, it's definitely worth it. So the sixth thing to keep in mind is understanding the risks involved. Obviously, physical injury and death are a part of that. I could tell you tons of stories. I'm not going to. Mental health challenges. PTSD is a very real thing. I've got buddies that served in a lot of active combat zones, and then they were on the ship with me. And I could tell you they had some mental health challenges, and we're going to talk a little bit later about how to kind of deal with that. But that's not something to just ignore. Another risk is deployment and family impact. I met my wife before my first deployment. She was a college kid, and then we got married between deployments, and then I had a deployment where I was gone. And it's hard on a spouse. It's hard on children. If you're a mother or a father or a husband or a wife when you're in the military, you are being away, separated from your spouse for long periods of time. Communication might be very, very, very challenging. It's 100% possible. I just celebrated this year 15 years of marriage. You can definitely do it. It is just a challenge, and it's something that your spouse needs to be aware of some of the challenges as well. Career risks. By this, I mean, let's say I wanted to join the military, but I also wanted to, start a business, you know, making security software or something like that. Those two things don't really go together. Like I said earlier, when you're active duty, you're not allowed to have any other jobs. You can't have a cybersecurity side business. You can't sell stuff on Etsy. You really do need to focus on what you're doing. So if a 4-year delay to getting your other business up and going or whatever you want to do is going to be impacted by the military, that's something to consider. It might not be a good fit if waiting 4 years is going to negatively impact you. Ethical dilemmas, by that I mean, you may be in combat zones, you may have to make decisions that could be very ethically challenging. All right, I do want to spend quite a bit of time on this. The seventh thing to consider is, are you ready to be shaped? I talked a little bit about how joining the military really shaped me as a person, helped me become a better leader, helped me become maybe more thought out and less rash in my decision making. I'm sure there's tons of things. Um, Physically, you will be shaped physically. If you're underweight, you'll gain weight. If you are overweight, you will lose weight. Basic training, boot camp, it's not fun. I don't think there's a way around that. It's not fun. So I could tell you a ton of stories. Write this down with your pen and paper. Identify boot camp for what it is, which is probably the worst 10-ish weeks of your life. And that's fine. In the moment, you're going to be tired. You're going to be really stressed. You're going to hear contradictory things from left and right. And it's meant to weed out people that are going to snap. The first, so I think my boot camp division, I think we had 80 people, 80 guys. We're all living in one big space. And the first, I want to say like 15, 16 days, something like that, one person got kicked out every single day. A lot of them just got kicked back, so they had to stay in boot camp longer. They were just with the division that just joined. And there were at least a couple guys that got kicked out altogether. That's because mentally they were just strained and they would just snap and become violent or something. Or there were physical things that they need to do and they just weren't able to do it. So they had to go back and get in better and better and better shape. But I remember doing the math and thinking like, all right, if there's 80 guys and we're losing one guy per day, how long can that go on for? Like, am I going to make it to the end of boot camp? I feel like I'm good, but will I make it? Um, it's incredibly stressful. You got an officer here telling you something, you got an officer here telling you something, and no matter what you do, you're going to be wrong. You're going to be yelled at. You're going to be tired. You're going to be hungry. You're going to be all that stuff. It's fine. It's meant to weed out people that might not be mentally ready for boot camp. It is meant to standardize people. By that I mean, um, like I said, if someone's overweight, it helps them get into a better shape so that they're going to be more fit. It gets people listening to orders. So when you're on a ship and you're under attack, you need to know who to listen to and you need to follow those directions because your life and other lives are at stake. Boot camp is really good at that, at helping everyone kind of get all those little, things figured out and just be nice and standardized in a time that's important, which is, in warfare. Um, Boot camp is just stressful. It's hard. It's fine. Identify it for what it is. Not a fun time. You'll get through it. And then there's going to be ongoing physical conditioning. They don't want people to get really out of shape. They need you to be pretty good in shape. So physically, you'll be shaped. Mentally, you'll be shaped. You'll learn to develop resilience. High stress situations, making decisions under pressure, when everything is going wrong in the military, having that mental capacity to just focus on what's important and plow through, it can save lives. And then that also transfers to civilian life. In my job here at Enlightium, I make a lot of decisions and things can be kind of stressful. And I feel like a lot of my military training helped me just focus on what's important and make decisions that are going to be in the best interest of the school. With the military, you also have to learn how to adapt and become disciplined and be able to do what you need to do to get the job done. Again, like imagine you're building a house, you need to be disciplined, you need to be adaptable, things are going to break, all that stuff. It's that mindset of I can do this, let me just prioritize and get things done. You will be shaped socially. By this, I mean the camaraderie, the teamwork. I grew up in a very small, very conservative little town, not a lot of diversity. I spent 18 years there, and then I joined the military where I was surrounded by people from literally all over the world. My ship had, I think, something like 250, 260 people. We had people from all over the US, all over the world, different, every single kind of background that you could think of. And the great part was that we were all together in a small place and dependent on each other. So I had to learn how to be able to forge friendships with people, working relationships, everything that I have just never really met before. And that's something that helped me grow as a person quite a bit. You will be dependent on people that you've never met before. So having that camaraderie, it really, really it helps you get through it. You'll be shaped emotionally, dealing with isolation, deployments. Like I said, like a year on deployment, I had friends. I had the ability to, write letters back home, but you do get very lonely. It's a very isolating time sometimes. And so you're going to be shaped to kind of deal with hardships. Hopefully, you'll be able to find a group of Christians. You'll be able to, read the Bible together, connect with each other, kind of depend on each other. But there are going to be times where you're feeling very alone. And again, that's just a season. It's a time of your life. It's a challenging time. And just know that you will get through it, especially with God and with other Christians that are surrounding you. And then there are a lot of mental health resources available for you, likely where you're stationed at, but definitely, at the VA, the Veterans Affairs Hospital. In the last 10, 20 years, I don't even know, mental health resources have really exploded within the VA. So that's a positive thing for sure. All right. The eighth thing to keep in mind is the impact on your family and your personal life. Um, every 3 years or so, your family is going to be relocated. So maybe you go from Whidbey Island, Washington to Norfolk, Virginia, and that means that all your stuff gets moved. The church life that you made the connection with, your wife's, friends and families, you're going to have to just relocate every 3 years. That's something to keep in mind. It's pretty standard, but it can be a challenge. Another impact is going to be deployments. Like I said, I did two deployments over about 12 months each, and a lot of different underways in between, and that can be a strain on relationships with your children, with the spouse, your family. Emotional challenges. Just thinking of like if you do see combat, that can be something that's going to be very challenging, and then you have to work with that with your spouse, with a church member or somebody to help you through that. Support network. So when I hear support network, I think a good group of friends back home, a connection to a church that just really means a lot to me. Making those friendships, and then you do have to move around every couple of years, so that is something to keep in mind. Let's say, kind of on that same idea that your spouse maybe wants to open like a bakery shop. If you have to relocate every 3 years, that's going to be kind of a challenge for her. So that's something to keep in mind. Starting and maintaining a family. I have plenty of friends who started a family while they were, seaside, and then, or while they're in the U.S., and then they, leave and they miss the birth of their child or things like that. My wife and I said, you know what, we know we're doing 4 years active. Let's wait until we're out before we start a family. And I'm really glad we did because now I've got two beautiful little girls and I get to be with them every single day. I know it'd be a challenge if I was deploying all the time for them, for me, and for my wife. Okay, we're just about there. Number nine, the decision making process. Do your research. I've mentioned this a couple times, but Google stuff, use ChatGPT, talk to people, and just really get a nice comprehensive idea of the pros and the cons and what's going to work for you. Don't just rely on I feel like I should do this or I haven't done the research, but I'll probably just go here. It might work, might not work. It's beneficial to do your research. Talk to people who are in the military and take what they say with a grain of salt. I would say that includes me. I'm a generally optimistic guy, so I can tell you stories about my military days, and I'll be all smiles. I'll be like, I haven't thought about that in 2 years, and I'll be laughing and telling all of the great things. But there are also challenges. I'm not going to focus too much on them because of my personality, but there are some real challenges. The other side of the coin, you might talk to someone who's like, oh, I had a horrible time, this and this and this. Yeah, they probably did have a horrible time. It sounds like they probably had an attitude problem. But there are a lot of benefits that they would have that they would have had as well. So kind of talk to a lot of people and just kind of, soak it all in and take it all with a grain of salt. I'd say don't make a rash decision. I did have some people that I served with that they're like, man, I'm in a bad situation with a relationship or I don't like my job. So I just up and signed. Like, I went to work on Friday, I signed on Saturday, shipped out Sunday, that kind of thing. That might work, but chances are you're going to be blindsiding family and they won't feel appreciated. You will not have thought everything through. So just make sure that whatever decision you're making, that it's well thought out, it's timed correctly, and it's not like a split, second decision. And have it be your decision. I worked with people that, they're like, my dad was in the army, his dad was in the army, his dad was in the army, and so here I am. I'm in the army. You know, he might have a great time. He might have a good experience. But it also should be a decision that he takes ownership of, so that he gets the most out of it, that he has a really good time. All right. And the final thing I want to talk about is having the right attitude. Knowing what you're getting into by doing the research and talking to people and knowing what you're going to get out of it is going to make a huge difference. By get out of it, I mean, I got a buddy who was in the military and he just doesn't use the VA. I think he used a little bit of his 9/11 bill, but then he stopped going to college. And like he just has all these things available to him that can make his life really easy, and he just doesn't really do it. He just like I'm busy. I look at all the different things I have access to, things that it can help me kind of get a leg up. I was able to buy a house without putting any money down. Like I said, I got paid to go to college. I walked away having made money and not lost money. These are huge benefits. So when you're thinking about joining and when you're in the service, just remember, why did I do this and what am I going to get out of it that's going to really, just kind of help me in the future. Having the right attitude, staying sharp, and just enjoying the season of your life is huge. Again, deployments, they can be hard. Boot camp, not fun. But just remembering why you're doing it, powering through, remember that you're not alone. Christ is with us. You have brothers and sisters in Christ that will be there for you as well. And then just try your best to enjoy the season because you will have hard times, you will have really fun times. And then when you're done, ideally, you can look back and say, that was great. So write these things down, the 10 things to consider, finding and putting a priority order for the jobs that you're interested in so that you're not just having an awful time and saying, I just chose the first job that showed up. No, try to find one that's really good for you. Find a few branches, Army, Navy, etc. Put them in an order and then try to find a job that's in one of those branches and do more research about the branches to figure out which one would I enjoy the most. Get everything in writing from your the blanket on them, the recruiters. Make sure that it's all clear, black and white, very specific, and have a copy of those things. I had all my stuff copied and I sent it to my mother to hang on to, just because I knew that I was going to be relocating a bunch. So having a family member keep a copy of that, not a bad idea. Know the benefits and the opportunities, and I'm actually going to elaborate on that. Take advantage of the benefits and opportunities. There's really no reason for you not to dip into the post 9/11 bill if you want to go to college. There's every reason you should. Go in for like a annual, medical checkup. The VA, generally that's the hospital, the network of hospitals. They often get a really bad rap. I've had a pretty good experience. When I lived in Washington, that VA didn't have a lot of lines. I was able to go to the emergency room. Got my glasses, all this stuff. And generally speaking, I took it all with a grain of salt, but I was like, yeah, this is a pretty good VA. The one where I live now, it's really big and it has a lot of patients. I haven't had as great of an experience there, so I'm trying to navigate like how early in advance do I need to set an appointment because it's all, for the most part, free and pretty good services. So I'd be foolish to not take advantage of that. Number five, understand the commitments, the time commitment, the challenging aspect of it. Number six, understand the risks. Know that you will be shaped. The person when you enter is going to be very different than the person when you're out. Know the impact on your family and your personal life. Make an informed decision, and then try to have the right attitude. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and let's start running through some questions. Ms. McCune, do you mind leading us in that?
All right, here we go. How many years in the Marines do you have to be in order for you to be able to retire?
It's a good question. I'm going to make a very educated guess. I believe it's 20 years for all the branches. You can do some research, you can talk to a recruiter, but I think generally speaking, 20 years is considered the retirement age. You can go beyond that and get extra, basically money. So my brother-in-law, I think he just finished with 24 years. He was a pilot, now he's a pilot for one of the major airlines. And so he was at 20 and he thought, well, I could retire now, or I could do another four because I really like the station I'm at and it works for my, his wife and his kids and all that stuff. So he re-upped for another 4 years. He retired at 24, and now the pension he gets is even higher. If he was in a place where he would not have enjoyed that last 4 years, he probably would have said, no, I'll just get out. But it should be 20 years. I'm pretty sure about that.
Okay. Is it better to join the military before or after you finish college?
That is a good question.
Yeah.
Um, I think it really depends on each person. I look at myself personally and I say, okay, when I joined the military, I was 18. I thought I was mature. I thought I was responsible. I thought I was organized. And I think if I had gone straight to college, I would have had a really bad time. A lot of the skills I learned in the military helped me be able to manage my schedule, excel in my classes, all that stuff. There's going to be some people that, for one reason or another, college is going to be the right choice. I'm going to take an educated guess and say the majority of people who do both college and military go in the order of military and college, and that is probably for a good reason.
Yes, I would agree. Plus, then you have the opportunity to have the military pay for your college.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, next question. How many ASVAB tests can you take at a time? Meaning, if you score low, how many attempts can you take?
That's another good question. I took it, I'm going to say 18 years ago, so I don't remember for sure. Um, I'm willing to bet that that first ASVAB I talked about, the one that's like not super strict, you could probably take that multiple times. You could probably take it if you do poorly or you just want to do better. And you could probably say, can I take it again? I doubt that they'll say no, because what they're trying to do is help you on the path to signing up. And if taking the test again is going to help you, then they're probably going to do it. For the real one, the hardcore one, yeah, I don't know. It could be one time, it could be multiple times. It's something that I just don't have a lot of experience with. But that's something where you can just talk to the recruiter and find out.
This next question, we've kind of already touched on it. Should I join when I turn 18 or should I go study a specific field in college to get a better understanding of the field? And I feel like we kind of already addressed that.
Yeah, I'd
Um,
say, whatever you feel is going to work best for you, talk to your mom and dad, talk to any trusted adults. And, because this is all new. I'm willing to bet that no one here has attended college full time or joined the military full time. So talk to people who have done both and kind of get an idea of, what is going to be the best path forward. You could start college with the intent to join the military, and then for whatever reason, decide not to do that. That's totally fine.
okay. How long does it take to complete the BMT?
Ooh, BMT is a term I'm not familiar with. Let me look up real fast. So that's the fun thing about the military is they use a lot of acronyms, and between the different branches, they might have different acronyms for the same thing.
It's basic training.
Oh, basic
Basic.
training, got it. So in that case, it was 10 weeks for me for the Navy. They said 2 months, and I said, oh, that's 8 weeks, and then it ended up being 10 weeks. Yeah, 10 weeks. There's going to be times in situations where it goes longer. So I had a guy that he wasn't a good swimmer, and one of the last tests we had to do before graduating was a swim test where you just had to kind of stay afloat for some amount of time. He couldn't do it, so they kicked him back a week. There are a couple other people that got kicked back for different reasons. Yeah, 10 weeks is probably just a good safe bet.
Okay. Um, in your opinion, what is the best field to join?
Ooh. So the route that I took that I mentioned before is I took the ASVAB and I got high enough, and they said you could have any job you wanted. And I said, because I was a little arrogant, well, what are the hardest ones to get into? And they said nuclear, and they said cryptology. And I said, give me more information on both. And I leaned towards cryptology, and I had a really good time with that. That was a lot of, if you don't know what it is, that's by design. It requires a very high security clearance. So I also had to go through all the hoops to get a clearance for that. Um, but I'm willing to bet that a lot of people would just be bored out of their mind with that. I enjoyed it, but It's not for everyone. There's that's a good question. It really just depends on your personality. And number one that I have on here, find and put in a priority order a few jobs that you're interested in. That's going to be the best way for you to figure out which one you should do.
Okay. What is the best thing to do if you want to get into one of the branches of the military and your parents don't really think you can or are scared and don't want you to join?
That is a really good question, and that's a very real question.
Yeah.
My mother was floored when I said, you know what, I thought about it, I prayed about it, and I want to join the military. Because my personality was as far from the military as you could think. I was a goofy kid. There was I didn't have a lot of structure or anything like that. So that was like as far left field as you can imagine. She did the best thing that she could have done and said, I'm going to pray with you. I'm going to talk to you about this, and I'll support you, and we'll figure this out together. And I think in her mind, when she was saying that, she's like, all right, Michael's going through a phase or something, and we'll talk about it and pray about it, and then he'll say, no, actually, I want to do college, which if I did, she would have been happy. But we prayed about it, we talked about it, and for a couple months, I kept saying, this is really where I feel like I'm supposed to go. And that was, I'm going to guess, really, really hard for her. She clearly didn't want to lose me for 4 years to traveling all over. She didn't want the worst possible thing to happen to me to happen. But she was very supportive. Um, I really appreciated the approaches she took. As a parent, that's hard. I've got two little kids. They're way too young for anything like this. And the fact that I have the experience of the military, if they said that they wanted to do it, I would at least kind of know how to guide them through the decision making process. And if they did join, I would have that connection with them that could help them while they're in. But if I hadn't been, that would be just really, really challenging. How do you support someone who wants to make a big life decision ahead of time that you don't agree with or understand? And so the best advice I would give to the whole family is um, don't make the rash decision. Do a lot of talking and praying, and just trust that God will nudge you in the right direction. And for parents, um, when your kid does join, the best thing that you can do when they're deployed is send them letters and send them baskets in the mail or gifts in the mail. Deployments are really hard, and one of the highlights is when mail day comes, and it doesn't come very often. And on my ship, they just have these massive bags, a couple dozen of them, filled with letters and boxes and stuff like that. And then it take hours for everyone to kind of sift through them and get them to the right departments and the right divisions and then to my hand. And the saddest thing was when I didn't get a letter. It sounds silly, but like just having that connection, it shows that that I got someone rooting for me back home, making that connection. So I'd say when your kid is deployed, make like clockwork every 2 weeks or every 3 or 4 weeks. Write them a letter, talk about what's going on. Try not to phrase anything of like, I wish you didn't go, or it's really hard here without you, but just be like, we're really proud of you. We're excited for you to come back. We'll have some burgers and stuff like that. And just try to keep it real supportive in those letters. I hope that kind of answers the question, but praying and trusting in God is going to be the best way to kind of navigate that.
That's a tough one.
This
How much combat do you see in the military?
depends. So going back to, and I'll slide back quite a bit to the jobs. If you're infantry, you're going to be in a place where um, danger is possible or probable. For me, I was on a ship, so we technically were always generally at risk of danger. Let's see, there we go. We were always at risk of danger. Sometimes they're much more obvious. We'd be going through um, different parts of the world, and there'd be small armored vehicles with 9 mils trained at us. So as our ship is crossing a canal, they're just going alongside of us, and it was a show of force, but it was dangerous. There we did anti-piracy operations; those can be kind of a wild card. Uh, just a lot of different possibilities of danger. But if you work, let's say, in logistics and support, and you're stationed at a port in the US and you don't go overseas or you're not on a vessel, your risk is technically lower. It's never zero, but it is technically lower. So it really just depends on your job. It depends on your station. A lot of variety. I'd say just assume that wherever you're going to go is going to be potentially dangerous.
Okay. This is another one about 20 years in retirement. I think that we kind of already addressed that. So I'm going to skip to the next one. I'm looking to go for a Navy fighter pilot, but I'm wearing glasses. Would I need to get LASIK?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, great questions.
So my brother-in-law, he started enlisted and he would work on aircraft. And he did that with the goal to take classes using the TAP program. And then once he had enough, then he would shoot for an officer and become a pilot. That all worked out. Um, when it comes to the medical things, what you don't want to do is hide any medical issues because you will be found out. But you also don't necessarily want to volunteer that you have medical issues. The glasses aspect is going to be a variable for this. So I would approach it with this. You talk to the recruiter or whoever once you're in can help you get to that position and say, I'm happy to do LASIK or whatever I need to make sure this happens. You don't want to be like, I have horrible eyesight, because then they're just going to go, no. But as you take the test and everything like that, just always be kind of proceeding with what can I do to get to this point? And if that's an obstacle, how can I overcome that obstacle? The VA does do LASIK surgery. So that might be something where if you want to be proactive, as soon as you can sign up for LASIK surgery, you could maybe try to do that with the idea of like 2 years from now, I'm going to try to become a pilot. So let's just get this taken care of early. I'm not an eye specialist. I'm not a doctor specialist. I'm not really a specialist in anything, but that would probably be the starting route to go.
Okay. If I went to a U.S. branch military college, could I join a different branch with the knowledge of the branch I went to college for?
It's a good question. Miss McCune might know more, but I'd say talk to the admissions department at that college and just kind of see what they're willing to be lenient on.
Yeah. Okay, and we kind of touched on this. If you fail boot camp, are you able to try again? If so, would you have to do more weeks?
By so that when I hear fail, I think that you go there and then maybe you had like a big psychological break, which definitely happened to a lot of people. Um, I don't know what happened to those people. I know I never saw them again. I don't think they died, but I'm willing to bet that that's going to be a big stain on their record. It's probably going to say tried boot camp, threatened to kill a bunch of people, got ejected. Like those are very real types of scenarios. If that person then tried to rejoin the Navy, the recruiter would see that and say, this guy's probably not going to do great. If he tried to join the Army or Air Force or something like that, they're also probably going to look at it and say, he snapped once, it's probably not going to work a second time. So if you're kicked out, my educated guess is you're probably one and done. If you get kicked back a little bit because like the guy who was swimming, who he wasn't a good swimmer, he wasn't strong enough, he didn't pass that test. That like he's in the military, I'm sure. At least he was. He just had to do another 1 or 2 or 3 weeks. And I think the worst part is he had to graduate with a bunch of people that he didn't know because we all got to know each other, all 80 of us, for better or for worse. And to graduate as a group was amazing. If I had to graduate with a bunch of people I didn't know, that'd be kind of embarrassing, kind of hard.
And don't you think, Michael? I mean, my son went to Marine boot camp, and one of the biggest things was they helped each other get through it. Um, like everybody is working together to get everybody through it. And what that was one of the things that really stood out for him. There were people that struggled, but they all worked together to make sure everybody made it,
And I
got where
think
they.
it's not fully altruistic. I think a lot of people are like, okay, if this guy doesn't do this, then we all have to, run laps or something like that. But there's also the element of like, you make really good friends and you want them to succeed. And if you have a way to help them, whether it's just motivation or something,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And that's all I have, I think.
Okay. Let's see. I see Jesse's hand is up. I'd be open to talk.
Yeah, so as was a question I just said done, so it wasn't anything messed. But how would you handle the situation if you're getting bullied, like at boot camp? Like, how would you handle that? Like, how would you get? Yeah,
That did happen a lot. Not to me. Because I was like, man, this is not a fun time. I'm just gonna be quiet and under the radar for like 10 weeks. Which, if anyone knows me, Mr. Brooks being quiet for 10 weeks is a
Can't
miracle.
imagine.
That's a
yeah, no.
miracle. But I was like, I don't want to be on anyone's radar. I'm just gonna be quiet. But people would bully other people. And from what I saw, it was usually things like, I'm trying to think of how to phrase it. Nighttime for us, instead of sleeping, people just argued with each other. They're like, you need to do this better. Why can't you do this? You need to be quiet. And they would just kind of yell at each other back and forth. And I'm tired. I'm just like, can everyone be quiet so I can sleep? And the bullying would happen in that sense, where at nighttime, people would pick on each other for not being up to snuff. And then people would pick on each other for picking on each other. Um, you know, if you're feeling it, if you are in boot camp and you're getting picked on for being shorter, for not being as strong, not being able to remember something, do your best to try to do those things, but also just identify it for what it is. This is 10 weeks of my life. That's going to be probably the worst 10 weeks of my life. I know what it is. It's not going to go on forever. I'll just get through it. And if I get through it with friends, great. If I get through it being the target of bullying, that's a bummer, but it's only 10 weeks. I can get through this.
Is there a height limit for the Marines?
That is a good question. I'd say Google it. Um, I I know you can't tell right now, but I'm not a super tall guy. I'm a little bit on the shorter side, but for me, it wasn't really an issue. With boot camp, we had to order ourselves in a height line, so the shorter people were in front, the taller people were in back, and the hardest part for me was when we're all marching, we all had to try to have the same length stride, and because my legs are a little bit shorter, I was like, ugh, with my legs just trying to keep up. That was a bummer, in the sense of like, I'd be annoyed while marching because I just want to walk at my normal pace. Besides that, that's fine. And Marcus, I see your hand.
So, do you think wearing contacts would be a good idea if I'll be a fighter pilot? Like, will it just get sucked out of my eyes?
The lenses wouldn't get sucked out of your eye. I do know that. They're pressurized inside the aircraft, and so my brother-in-law tells stories about like the G forces. Like he'll feel that every now and then. Back when he was doing that, but I don't think the contacts would be pulled left or right or anything like that. The contacts for a pilot is more of an issue with just making sure that you have as perfect a vision as possible. This is not medical advice. I'm not a medical doctor. Definitely do some research, talk to medical people. The path to take if you don't have great eyesight and you want to be a pilot is probably going to be to try to get corrective surgery.
hmm And I know that the height limit, like, it's in between 5'4" and 6'5" for being a fighter pilot.
I'm not sure. I'm neither of those things. I'm not 5'4" or 6'5", and I'm not a pilot as well. That'd be something you could talk to the recruiter and just say, is my height going to be an issue at any point? Kind of going back to like, what is my ultimate objective? Is going to be to fly a plane. And start getting in writing all the different challenges that might stop you from doing that, and then proactively trying to overcome those. So if it's getting information, like is the height going to be too much? Then that's something you can get in writing or figure out. My brother-in-law he's probably like 6'3". He's a tall guy. So it's probably fine. And then again, with the eyesight, just seeing what you can do to proactively correct that ahead of time. And I'm not a
Mhm.
doctor.
I do know.
Oh, I think you were saying something and then we lost you.
I do know that for being a fighter pilot, you have to get good grades, and you have to like get the instructor to guarantee you're gonna be a fighter pilot.
Okay.
Is there anything I should look out for?
As far as like grades and stuff like that.
Yeah, and so don't like get reassigned without my knowledge or something.
Gotcha. Yeah, the two things I'd recommend is getting an entire list of all the things that need to happen for you to become that pilot, and then just addressing everything as quickly and smartly as you can, just to make sure all the steps are there. If it's something like you need to get a guarantee from a teacher or something like that, if they do give you that guarantee, and I don't know too much about that area, but if you need to have a referral or something like that from a teacher, making sure that that's in writing as well, because what you'd hate to get is a like a verbal like yeah I'll back you up, and then they just never follow through with it. That's not an
Mhm.
area I'm as knowledgeable about.
Yeah. After I retire from Navy, being a fighter pilot, my goal would be like to go on the Blue Angels. Um, but I just want to know what would be the difference between Navy and Air Force. What are the benefits?
Okay, that's a good question. And I'll answer this, and we'll bounce to Caden. I'm fine staying a little bit late. I'm not in a rush to get out. First off, the Blue Angels used to practice right above where I went to A school and C school, and so at all hours of the day and night, vroom, they go over really loud. And the first, I'm gonna say 20 times, I'm like, wow, it's the Blue Angels, and then I got really annoyed with them because they'd be waking me up or distracting me. And then I'd travel, home or go to different places, and the Blue Angels would visit, and people would be like, "Wow!" And I'm like, "They're great." So the question was Air Force or Navy. That's another one where I can give you a couple general things, but you're going to want to do some research, have that be a part of the job search, and then the branch search, and then talking to your recruiter and getting things in writing. It's my understanding, and I could be wrong in this, that the Navy technically has more aircraft than the Air Force. What that means to you, probably nothing. But that's just something I want to brag about because I was in the Navy. With the Navy, I do know that the pilots would get very, very, very good at taking off on a very small runway because ships are only so long, and being able to also stop on a runway. And there are different tools that they use for that to help slow planes down when they're landing and such. But that is a challenge. A buddy of mine's in the air. He was in the Air Force, and I used to. There's a lot of fun rivalry between the branches, and he and I would still joke about how in the Air Force he got really good at pushing buttons because the idea is that Air Force, like they're not as like combat centric. And then he'd talk about like me going out to the ship and then just being lost at sea for a while. So to answer your question, do that research about jobs, do the research about branches, and you'll start to kind of figure out like what is of interest. And if there's something that feels like a no go for you, then just look the other way and keep doing research. And Caden, I see your hand.
When you were in the military a long time ago, well, before you joined the military, when you did your ASVAB, your basic ASVAB, is there anything that you can like remember that stood out as like when they were asking you the questions that you maybe not have known or like was it interesting that they asked you? Something that we can maybe study up on?
That's a good question. I bet you that there's plenty of ASVAB study guides. If I recall, I think there were a lot of logic problems, and I love those. So I think I did really well with those, and that kind of helped my trajectory. Logic problems, I think there was basic English stuff like that, because a lot of stuff is going to be in writing when it comes to procedures. So let's say you got a job, uh, as an electrician in the military, you're going to have very standardized documentation that you have to follow for everything. So they want to make sure that you can, read and write and stuff like that. I think that was generally it. Was logic stuff, math stuff, English stuff, maybe some science stuff. And it's probably comparable to like the SAT and the ACT. Any other questions? Okay, perfect. Well, thank you guys so much. For those who stick around, I appreciate it. We'll go ahead and let you guys go. Have a great day.